We are live with NYSTV. This is John Pounders, your host, and tonight we have Gary Wayne joining us, and I want to show you guys a picture of the show that we have going on tonight. This is called The Chinese Dragon King / Nephilim Bloodline with Gary Wayne, and Chinese prehistory overflows with strange accounts of dragon creation gods, long ages of dragon god kings, and dragon demigod kings that produced the famous Li family and royal Nephilim bloodlines. So tonight we're going to be talking about that with Gary, and Gary's joined us many times before. He's probably we probably had him more than almost any guests that we've had to date, other than maybe Rob Skiba and David Carrico. So he's definitely a veteran here on NYSTV, and we're thankful for him. And before we get going tonight, I would like to discuss a couple things. I want you guys to keep John Hall in prayer. He is having surgery tomorrow. I thought he was having it today, but he's having it tomorrow. He's in a lot of discomfort. He had a hernia bust out of his stomach area, and so just keep him in your prayers, and that's why he's not with us tonight. And that's pretty much what I want to discuss. Just make sure you guys pray for him, and anything else that anyone else that's going through any issues right now. I know there's a list. I have a list of people that are going through issues as we speak, so just keep all your friends in your prayers and keep your brothers. And for those of you that are watching on YouTube and you'd like to join our private chat, we do have the link in the description on YouTube, so you can join and hop over. If not, there's a YouTube chat, and Kevin Stoll is moderating it right now. And actually, Kevin Stoll is the reason we're having this show, because he kept tagging me in these posts that Gary was doing, and I was like, this is pretty cool. We definitely got to do a show about it. So we set up with Gary. We got Gary today, and we also have Gary Saturday to talk about Gnosticism with David Carrico on the Midnight Ride. So Gary, welcome to the show, man. Welcome back.
Well, happy to be back, and happy to be doing a one-on-one with you. That's when I was first starting out, you were one of the first few people to interview me, and I think we did a number of one-on-one and mostly audio, where you added pictures and things like that, and then you did one tremendous video with me that when we got together down in Nashville, that is probably my most watched interview. But I think you've got two of my most watched interviews. That one, and I think was Azaziel was the other one. So
yeah, man,
yeah,
so over a year. It'd been over a year, and I think I was your second interview. I think Jake Rahutsky was your first, and I was your second. And I think I was actually on the first interview with Jake when you guys did the interview, and I was like, man, this guy's got a golden book here. This is amazing. So I had you on as much as I could. That's for sure.
Yeah, and actually it was Justin Fall who I did the first interview with, and then Jake was the second one. But I was surprised when I got on with the interview with Jake that there was somebody else on there that I wasn't familiar with, that was with a TV company, and I was wondering, wow, that should be interesting. But I was a little intimidated. So, but yeah, the show went well, though. I thought the three of us did a very good show.
Yeah, it was awesome, man. I couldn't find it online. I was looking for that show the other day. I'm sure it's on there somewhere, but I had trouble finding it. But anyways, so tell us a little bit. Everybody pretty much knows who you are. If they don't, I ask you to go back and look at some of Gary's videos. He wrote a book called The Genesis 6 Conspiracy. It is an amazing book. It covers the widest variety of Nephilim bloodlines, their plan to exert their power over humankind and to enslave us. And this is a really, really good book for those of you that haven't read it yet. And so, Gary, tell us what we're going to be talking about tonight, man. Get us into the subject.
Well, what I wanted to do when, after the book came out, eventually was maybe get into some more bloodlines and aspects that I didn't write in the book, because, I left 30% out of the book. And a lot of the posts that I do today, I will post on the book, and I'll do interviews and things like that. But I'm starting, posting more and more stuff that maybe didn't make the book, or just I have an interest in. And certainly, when we talk about the bloodlines of the Nephilim, most people just think about that as a European or a Western European thing that descends down through the Middle East, ancient empires after the flood. And it's more than that. And so I wanted to start shedding a little bit of light on that, because Daniel 2 is a very interesting prophecy, right? Where you have the first introduction of the metal empires, with the last two empires that are mixed of iron and clay. And so these kings coming that descend down out of the metal empires are going to intermixed with the offspring of humans, right? So it's a very mysterious sort of prophecy, and you have two legs to this prophecy. But what's key is that you've got descendants coming down through these ancient empires and these ancient bloodlines that seems to be, and I have a post on this on my timeline on one of the Gary Wayne Genesis 6 pages as well. I posted it there on Daniel 2 and the Metal Empires. And so we know the end time 10 empire is going to have 10 of these kings, but perhaps they're intermixed with clay, which would go back to Adam and humans, right? So maybe the two legs represent two different races or two different legs to the empire. We're not sure, but it's that intermixing of the offspring that caught my attention, and why I did that as a subsequent post to the Dragon Kings and to the Lee family. And so where I'm going with this is that we should look at this worldwide empire as not just one country. It's going to be, in my opinion, a group of nations, 10 groups of nations, whether or not it's a trading bloc like NAFTA or the restructured EEC into two, or let's say a Russian one, a Chinese one, and on and on and on. It's going to be groups of countries that are working together to send one of their, in this case, using the prophetic avenue, kings to the world government. And if that's the case, then we have to take into account that there's possibly some other dragon bloodlines that aren't just the Western European ones that everybody likes to sort of look towards. And so I thought I'd do my first foray into that, into the Chinese prehistory and how that connects down to royal families, and is there a connection to secret societies with that, and is there a connection to the ruling class with that? So that's why I did the one on the Lees and the Dragon King. So that's kind of where I came from on that.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because you're right. I mean, most people, when they think of this, they think of the Merovingian bloodlines, or they think of all these Illuminati secret societies that come from Europe. But we forget that there's a huge dragon culture in China and Japan and all these countries that are not white American people. And even, just every country pretty much has these things. Yes. We look at the Aztecs everywhere. But this one's interesting because I don't know of too many people that ever touch on this stuff that I know of. And I know we've talked about it a little bit in a past show. We didn't talk much about it, but we did talk a little bit about it. So who is this Lee family, and kind of give us a background on them?
Yeah, so let's back up just a step or two. And when I was talking about these kings of the end time world empire, we also learn in Revelation that at Armageddon, it's the kings of the east that are invading as part of the War of Armageddon. And that is rarely connected to the 10 King Empire, because most people aren't looking at it as sort of this global empire of groups of nations. I think that wording is specific, and I think that's referring to the trading blocks or the groups of nations out of the east. And I think that's very, very important to sort of keep in mind, that even though there's some, there's speculation and trying to connect dots here, we're talking about things that prophetically sort of make sense and fit the mold. And when we talk about prehistory, certainly the Chinese prehistory is burgeoning and overflowing with dragon mythology. So all of a sudden you have that tie-in between the serpents and the dragons out of China and the serpent gods, let's say like an Enki god out of Sumeria, and the serpentine feathered serpent gods that are in the Quiché Maya culture and South American culture. So the feathered serpent would be like a seraphim angel. And if people have followed me on other shows, that I make a case that the seraphim angels are a serpent-faced angelic being with wings. So you have a snake-like being that's got wings, and you have an angelic dragon. If you connect that with the feathered serpent, well, again, you'd probably, if they're flying around in the physical world, they probably did have feathers as part of their wings, and they just weren't a spiritual being in this realm. They actually took a form. So all of this sort of comes together with the ideology of the dragons that are in every culture that is absolutely unaccounted for. And now let's just do a little bit of a historical preface here in terms of how you get similar stories after the flood that are also meshed with before flood stories that are so similar around the world, and in this case, the East. And I want to start with the understanding that if you understand what happens in the Bible, it's a really good sort of centerpiece to start looking at this from. And we have an incident at Babel with Nimrod, which everybody is very, very familiar with, and there's a dispersion of the people and a confusion of the languages. And so you have two centers of religion setting up after the flood. You have what Nimrod is going to continue to practice as he goes into Chaldea, Babylon, and becomes, the Akkadian Empire, and all of those religions that are sort of related around that. And you have the Egyptian religion that Hermes travels with Mizraim and other brothers of the same clan to restart the Egyptian religion. Those two become the two pillars of religion after the flood. And from there, Egypt spreads that religion right around the Mediterranean and sets up a similar pantheon of gods and allegories, just with different vernacular names. Essentially, all the other Mediterranean nations are going to have the religion of Egypt, which is the same religion of Chaldea. And what happens after Chaldea is you have a migration of people into India, which starts the Hindu religion, and then you have Buddhism, which comes later on as an offshoot of that. And people continue to migrate into China, whether or not it's immediate or sometime thereafter, that's not always clear. But you have the upstart religions of ancient Taoism of China. Also, Confucianism will be sort of an outbranch of that, and all the various sort of sub-religions of China come out of Taoism, and then that will spread over to Japan, which will be, again, an outreach of that same type of religion, which is called Shintoism. And there's, again, I know there's a few other religions of the East that are out there, but understand they're the same religion and the same pantheon with the same sort of origin. So you kind of understand that there should be a similarity of the stories, and should be almost a similarity of the antediluvian story as well, only from these polytheist different perspectives. So, and to give an example of what I'm talking about and how that spreads through and the relationship is you have the Mitanni dynasty in the Middle East that is, one of the famous pure blood dynasties of the Middle East, and it's up there with Egypt, and it's up there with the Hittite dynasty, and they were founded by Aryans, and the Aryan Marianu as they come down through prehistory, and they had these gods that are very similar to the gods that were in India, and again, which then spreads on to China and Japan and all of Southeast Asia. So they had gods in their religion that were called like Indra and Varuna and Mithra. And if people don't understand that Mithricism comes out of Zoroastrianism, which is the same religion of the Mitanni, then they don't know the religious history. So Mithricism that ended up dominating Rome, and particularly the army of Rome, at the time of Christianity, and part of that major religion that is, sort of conflated with Christianity by Constantine, that's Zoroastrianism. And so if we take that a little bit further, we understand that the gods of the Aryan religion are devas, and they're shining ones, and these devas help the evil hostile spirit called the Angra Mainyu. That would be the equivalent to like Satan in Christianity. And then the Amritas were created to help Mazda. And of course, Mazda is the serpent god of Zoroastrianism. Okay, and so that's divided into two groups. That's the Avesta religion of the Aryans, but what moves into the Indus Valley and the Punjab is the Sanskrit. And so that's why we have the Vedas coming down in an Aryan Indo-European language as it's written down, because the Aryans were the ones who brought that with it, and it was written down in their language because they set up the Brahmas as that type of religion. So I just wanted to show a connection for credibility of how we go from A to B, and then we can start now talking a little bit more about the Chinese dynasty. So is there anything you wanted to expound on that, John?
Not really. I know that you're kind of setting it up for what's coming up, but I know that one thing that one thing that a lot of people don't understand is how all these religions, you talked about these different religions, how they all tie in to ultimately the worship of the Nephilim king, or the worship of Lucifer. Can you just talk a little bit about how, just a small bit, because I know you've discussed this in many other shows, but for people that this is their first time hearing something like this, can you kind of describe how all these tie together? You talked a little bit about it, about these seraphim that are having children, demigods, and all these different stuff, but the Babylonian, split. But can you, I guess, discuss what the ultimate goal of each of these religions is, who they worship?
Well, ultimately, these are all sun-worshipping religions, right? And it's the religion of Enoch the evil. And ultimately, they're all worshiping a dualistic religion of good and evil, and they have a pantheon of gods, and generally there's a hierarchy of them, and 7 is kind of the constant sort of number, just as China has 7 mountains and seven great sort of gods of the mountain. And so their ultimate goal is, and they all produce offspring or Nephilim by human females. And it's one of those amazing constants that is in all cultures around the world, along with the flood story. And so you start to get these constants that are in all religions, whether or not it's serpent gods, serpent offspring of kings, and the dragon and the serpent imagery. And wherever you have that, you have pyramids, just as you have Chinese pyramids and pyramids around the world and on all continents. You have a flood story, you have a story of giants, and so many other things that you can't dismiss, at least I can't dismiss, the coincidence, because you get the mathematical zero as you start to apply all of these different sort of combinations. And it's all talking about a rebellion, right? And a rebellion either against the gods or against a specific god. And typically all of them have this one god, which is like Enlil, let's say, in the Sumerian tradition, which is the brother of Enki. And they all have another god in there that they call the evil god, in this inside-out polytheist religion, where that evil god is the god of the Bible. And that's always who they equate them to. And then this other god, who is the serpent god, is providing knowledge and wisdom and civilization in all cultures. And again, this is who they turn into this god of light and god of freedom, and helping humans rebel against this evil god is a Satan-like figure. So we see this consistency that goes across all religions and all cultures.
Right. And it's important to note this, just in case, like I said, just in case people, this is their first time. Genesis 6 in the scripture does speak of this event and these events that we're talking about tonight. This is not just some mythology. This is actually something that is contained in Genesis 6. And Gary wrote a book about the Genesis 6 conspiracy. So in case you're wondering, how does this all fit into the scriptures, go read Genesis 6, where it talks about the angels coming down and mating with women and producing offspring. So I just want to add that in just in case, because there's always somebody new that listens at some point and they have no idea what we're talking about here. So I wanted to add that in.
Yeah, and to underline that, these seraphims are likely the same serpent gods as fallen angels as we know them, as in other cultures. If you go to Isaiah 6, that's where seraphim is mentioned. and it's only mentioned there as an order, and a very high order, probably the highest ranking order, right there with cherubim. And these angels in Isaiah 6 are around the throne of God, right? Just as Satan, it has almost a breastplate, has 9 jewels on it. It's very similar to the priests of Israel, who will have 12 jewels on the breastplate. So one wonders whether or not Satan was this very high priest-like seraphim of the that was around the throne, because he was a very high individual. But if you take that route back as to what were these seraphims, they were beings created from fire. They were messengers and associated with serpents, as that meaning goes back. Now, if you go back to Isaiah, not Isaiah, if you go back to Numbers 21, about the account in the desert with the Israelites and the venomous snakes, when it talks about the venomous snakes that are attacking the Israelites, that goes back to the Hebrew word nakash, just as the serpent in Eden does. But the one snake reference that does not go back to nakash is the image that of a serpent that Moses puts on his staff, that's going to protect the Israelites and cure them from these venomous snakes. And that word goes back to seraph, or seraphim. And so we take it from that these seraphim angels were snake-like beings, or dragons. And then when we go to Revelation 12, we cement it. Because in Revelation 12, clearly it says Satan is a serpent and a dragon and the devil of old and ancient times. And I think maybe he might have been seraphim and cherubim. He was so powerful, because a lot of people think that if Satan is one individual with Lucifer or Hallel, then Satan is also cherubim, as it's stated in Ezekiel. So I think he's both. I think it's one and the same person, but that's for another discussion and show. So that's how that sort of relates over to the feathered and plumed serpents and these other serpent gods around the earth. So now rolling forward into Chinese history, we understand that in prehistory there is creation.
Think we lost you, Gary. I think we lost Gary for a second, guys. So I'll roll on here for a minute. So for those of you that are asking questions, I've already posted several of them. So if you want to keep asking questions until Gary gets back, I can post them on the group. But for those of you that are interested in this story, this was something, the Genesis 6 idea was something that as soon as I read the Bible with open eyes, it completely just blew my mind. And I was on this quest for learning about this for I don't know how long. And I know a lot of you are the same exact way. Okay, Gary's back, so I'll let him continue.
Not sure how that happened. All of a sudden I had music playing in my ears, and then so anyways, the internet. Wonderful stuff. So where did I get cut off in terms of?
You were talking about, you were getting ready to introduce into the Chinese dynasties. So right in time, perfect timing when it cut off.
Right. And so when we get into Chinese prehistory, we're talking about creation dragons as it comes out. And of course, Pangu is this major event and sort of the first of these major dragon figures for creation. And there's another interesting thing that comes along in most polytheist religions, which again shows that they're quite similar, is that they show creation coming together through cosmic eggs by the cosmic dragon to produce life. And this is required to ease and calm the chaos of the waters of the universe, to help create heaven and earth. And all the other religions, it doesn't matter where you go, whether or not it's any continent or culture, whether it is, let's say, Mesopotamia, where you might have Lotan or Tiamat or Yam, or you've got the Midgard serpent of the Asgard, or Leviathan, it is a very, very similar story. The difference being is one's a polytheist account and the other one is a monotheist account. So whether or not it's Marduk or Baal that is breaking the head of Tiamat or Lotan, using that to divide and make the sky and the earth and the separation of the waters and the calming of the chaos, or God is killing the multi-headed Leviathan. There's a similarity in prehistory, although when I look at all of them, I'll just say for the record is that the Genesis account is by far the more accurate, more detailed, and most logical account, just because creation needs to happen in that sort of event. And so maybe these dragons were involved like Leviathan, but not quite in the same manner, because there's a bunch of misdirection as you come out of that. And it's out of Pangu that you get the three sovereigns that are going to create sort of antediluvian society. And you have like three sovereigns, as they're called in the Chinese mythology. You have a heavenly sovereign, and you have an earthly sovereign, and you have a human sovereign. And then after that, you have the 5 empires. And by the time you get down to probably the most important figure to where we're going today is Yu the Great, who is a descendant coming out of these gods. You are now after the flood. And Chinese prehistory will go back to only about as a date at just after 3000 BC for these creation gods that we're talking about, but specifically after the flood and with Yu the Great and with a few others that he enlists, are calming the flood and reorganizing civilization. And that's kind of dated to around, say, 2100 to 2200 BC. Some people will move that a little bit lower. So again, if you take that back to biblical sort of history and chronology, you have the flood happening somewhere around 23 to 2400 BC, where secular society will date that closer to say 2900 to 3000 BC. So what you see is a kind of a lining up that this seems to be more of a story that probably comes out of the dispersion out of Babel with the timing. And so out of Yu the Great, you get him founding this dynasty that's called the Xia dynasty, Z or XIA, circa again 2100 to 2200 BCE. And if you want to know who, Yu the Great was the grandson of Xuanzhu and son of Gun, but these are all going back into those other emperors, which I won't bore everybody with the details on it. I do have a post on it on my timeline and Genesis 6 conspiracy page if you want to get more detail on them. But what happens is now they've created civilization after the flood, and they're going to pass this on to more of a human type of king, but it is a king that still has the bloodlines of the gods in it. So again, we're back into this Nephilim dynasty sort of people. And so the Xia people, they're battling with Yu the Great to suppress another tribe called the Xiu, led by another emperor named Yan, which is another offspring of these other gods that we talked about before. But the Xia people, along with Yu the Great, they win this war, and they set up sort of the first Chinese civilization with a dynastic set of kings, and that is known as the tribe of Li. So they're known as two names, the Li tribe or the tribe of Li. And so all the other dynasties now, for the most part, as they come down through history from the Xiao dynasty to the Ming dynasty, they all will take their bloodlines back to Li and Yu the Great. And so you have this bloodline that is coming down through history. So before I move on, John, any questions or anything you want to add on that?
Well, obviously right now have you seen the new movie, the Great Wall movie?
No, I haven't.
Basically, they're giants on the other side of this Great Wall that they're keeping out. It's a movie about that. And I know that we'll get into a little bit more about that, but as far as these dynasties are concerned, how did they keep power back then? What was their reign like? I mean, is there any record of how brutal they may have been or anything like that?
Well, I think they were the typical, archetypical Nephilim reign. I mean, you only maintain power like that through force of will, and using the power of the uh, occultic sciences, which is their religion, right? So, I mean, when we understand Taoism and we understand alchemy, these are key. These are part of the seven sacred sciences. And so they utilize the military. And there's wars. There's wars continually putting down suppressions and rising sort of nobles into other kings, and to maintain these dynasties for such a long period of time. You know, it's done through power and force. And there were totalitarian regimes, and the noble class lived well, and the poor were very, very poor. They were essentially slaves. So again, you have the same sort of structure that's set up in China as it is in these other Nephilim kingships, whether it's Egypt or it's in Chaldea or the Hittites or the Amalekites. It's all the same type of system, because they all come out of the same belief system, the same religion, worshiping the same fallen angels, and all have the same pantheon, just different vernacular names to the gods.
All right. And so are these dynasties, these Chinese dynasties, are these the same dynasties as the Japanese, or are these two different, completely two different dynasties there?
Well, if you look at Shintoism, that's a very similar religion and kind of an offshoot of the Taoist religion. And then when you look at Japanese prehistory, it actually starts in around 600 BC, but it has a sort of antediluvian prehistory that, again, is very, very similar to the Chinese one. And so where scholars don't believe that the Yamato dynasty can actually take their genealogy back to 600 BC. They actually move that to around 200 BC, to the time of the Qin dynasty in China. And what is going on with that is that you have this first king that's in 600 BC called Jima, and he's basically a descendant of the gods, so he's another Nephilim. But the first 9 or 10 of these original kings are thought to be just sort of a mythology that's overlaid. But in around 200, you have this interesting going on with one of the Qin dynasty members, and I'm just looking for some notes on that one. I'll see what I've got. But his name is Zhu Fu, and he's a sorcerer in the Qin dynasty. And what he does is he's commissioned to go find this this mountain that is called Penliang, as I recall, and search, because this is supposed to be one of those mountains of immortality. And so they're absolutely possessed by this immortality. And so what happens is the Emperor Qin Shi Huang commissions him with an army of men, basically like 5,000 people, mixed of men and women, to go find this mountain. And so he never comes back, this Zhu Fu. People looking for spelling on that, look at XU. And so it's pronounced Shufu, as if I've got that right. And so he lands in Japan on the Kii Peninsula, just as this Jimu character does. So he migrates from somewhere that isn't named in the Kajiki, which is the Japanese, one of their historic mythology books as it comes down through history. And so he actually finds Fuji Mountain, that the Japanese believe is that he thought was this mountain of immortality that he was looking for. And so they think that this, a lot of the Chinese scholars believe, and there's some Japanese ones that would agree with this, think that this is the start of the Japanese Yamamoto dynasty. And it's interesting to note that the Yamamoto dynasty, or the Japanese bloodline, It spoke Chinese right up to about the 8th century within the court. You know, the designs of that court were designed after a Chinese monument and temples. So seems that what's happened is that in the Qin dynasty, again, would be a descendant of the Li dynasty, right? But what's also interesting about Tzu, the House of Tzu, is this is another original tribe of people. So they were part of helping with Yu the Great and the Li or the Xia, but they're not in power. But he's a sorcerer, so he'd be a noble of the high class, and that bloodline is maintained. So, and if they're in with the Qin dynasty and marrying with the nobles all the way through, then you expect that you're going to have a Li bloodline that is in Japan. So you have these mainly through Southeast Asia. You have a Li bloodline, and you have the Zhou bloodline that is setting up new dynasties in new areas, whether or not it's in Korea or in Thailand or anywhere in Southeast Asia, just to sort of make that a quick sort of snapshot.
Very good. Yeah. So I guess there's really no more questions I have on that part of it. I know there's plenty of audience questions, but we'll get to those at the end because some of them are from some stuff you said earlier. But if you want to continue on that path there for a little bit, I know this when I look at this stuff. I mean, you can. There's no way to get past the idea of the dragon bloodlines. That's for sure. And then the Great Wall of China. I don't know where you're going next, but I'm interested to hear, and I'll save my questions until I. And if I don't hear what I was going to ask, I'll talk.
Yeah. So I want to give a little more credibility to what I'm saying about. Because everybody would say that's just mythology or whatever. But if, in terms of these Chinese dynasties linking themselves back to the Li family. So if you have the Tang dynasty of China, I mean, that was founded by Li Yuan. Okay, so, and Li is the surname. And you also have, you know, Laozi as one of the main philosophers who is also thought to be part of the Li bloodline. And then you have the Han and Huang dynasty that's founded by Li Bang. And you have several different spellings of Li, whether it's Li, Liu, Lee, but they're all a sort of just, because there's many different dialects in Chinese, so they'll have a few different spellings, but they're all going back to the same Li family. And so just as a couple of quick examples as Li family members starting new dynasties, and the Zhao dynasty again takes their lineage right back to the Zhao, that's Zhou, right back to the Yu the Great, which was the Xia and Li tribes. So, and if we take that further downstream, if we look at the current president of China, his name is Li Peng. Li is the surname. And if we looked at, you know, some other Lis, let's say in Singapore, there was Ling Kuan Yew and Li Ka-shing out of Hong Kong. The Lis are a dominant family right throughout Southeast Asia. They're not just in China. That's why I mentioned earlier about the Li family and clan that is that had spread out to other parts of the countries. And they also have this connection with secret societies as well. And so you've got like the Red Spear Society, and you've got the, you know, Illuminati branches. You have the Tzu Society. You've got the Ko Inu Hui secret society. You have the Green Gang secret society. And understand that they use these mafia groups to help with the reign, either through insurrection to help gain power and then to help gain control. So they're not only working with the levers of government, they're also working through secret societies and Chinese mafia to hold control. And so these are kind of considered like the Illuminati of the East. And then if you run through all of the different sort of triad branches that are around the world, you've got them all run by members of the Li family. So it doesn't matter whether or not you go to England, or it doesn't matter whether you go to the United States, that's going to be run by somebody from the Li family.
And you had some interesting pictures. I was trying to find some of this stuff because it tied, basically there was ancient pictures where people had looked like square and compasses in their hand, and I was going to try to find those so I could share it, but it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, you find this imagery of sacred, of Freemasonry sort of iconology that should not be mixed in with ancient Chinese history. But what you find is that, again, if you go back to the 7 sacred sciences, they are related, right? Masonry is the 5th science. It's this mystical religion that creates the secret societies to develop the 7 sacred sciences. And building obviously is a significant one of the ancient times, which was why Masonry was so important, or otherwise known as geometry.
Yeah, and they, the Asian culture, the Chinese, they have some of the most amazing buildings that you'll see anywhere.
Yep.
And it's a little different style than we see out west, but you can tell some of these ancient places that are just. I was watching a show, and it was on Discovery Channel, I believe, but they found this underground building basically that had these. I can't remember if there were statues everywhere. They look like statues of soldiers. But I'm trying to find that picture so I can share it.
Yeah.
So
Terracotta Soldiers.
That's it. Yep. And I don't know where that dates to and where that kind of is, but it's pretty amazing.
It's absolutely amazing. And the Rockefellers would go over and meet with the Li family, and that's one of those ancient pictures. He was meeting with I think it was it David Rockefeller on the picture? It doesn't matter. But when Li Peng comes to China, or comes from China to the US, he meets with the Rockefellers. I mean, this is just not a coincidence. And, Li Peng, he managed the economy for many years before rising up. You have the Li family that's heavily involved with Mao Zedong and the revolution. That's Pangu. You've got a picture up there right now.
I was going to ask what we were looking at here. I'm trying to.
Yeah, and he was I mean, that's I think that's more of a stylized version, because those 2 bumps on the head there, he was a horn god. And so where have we heard that horn god scenario before? Well, it's in with the pan gods, it's in with Azazel, it's in with the serpent gods.
His name was Pangu, you said?
Yeah, Pangu. That's their first god. Yeah.
And then what are we looking at here? Let me zoom out a little bit here. And my computer's a little bit slow right now. So this is where we have the square and compasses. You can't see it very well.
Yeah, so if you look up on the one that's on the screen on the left, you've got a T-square up there, and then you've got a compass that's being held in the other hand. And then you've got the third eye sort of representation on the forehead of the female on the right. And these are creation gods with snake imagery on the bottom. So what they're doing is they're encompassing the belief system of the sciences. Oh, and some of the dragons were a turtle god form. So there were different types of gods. And you see these turtle gods show up in India and Southeast Asia and other parts around the world. Yeah, and that's the picture of a Li and one of the Rockefellers. A very, very old picture.
Interesting. So, yeah, there was other stuff too. I was looking at one of the scepters that the Pope has, and it's almost identical to this picture. If I can go back here, well, this picture of these 2 serpent beings with the square and compass. It's got it wrapped around, obviously like Baphomet, but it's even got the disc in the middle.
Yeah.
everything, and there's two serpents that are pointing towards it. And I want to say somebody shared that in one of your pictures, but I can't remember where I saw it. But yeah, it's almost identical to what we see in the Vatican. It's amazing. I know you've tied a lot of this stuff in together. You know, people that haven't read your book yet have no idea how all this stuff ties together into um, just a complete domination of the world. I mean, it's interesting.
Yeah, and you know, when you get into the Tzu Society, I mean, that is looked upon as the Freemasonic organization of the East, and it is so very, very similar. And again, how do you have that grow up in parallel through the millennia and be so very, very similar to the Masonic organization? And of course, you know, the Tzu Society means five, Wu meaning five, you know, from those five gods that I was telling about earlier that are there before you the Great. So it goes, again, they're taking that, their allegory right back into history. And you know, Freemasonry and the Tzu Society have almost the same sort of organizational structure and tenets and belief system. And again, I don't believe you can get that sort of coincidence just happening without explanation. I think it's the same belief system, right? That's why when you have in the end time to understand that this is this old religion, this isn't Islam that's going to be, in my opinion, the universal religion. You can't do it by force anyways, right? But it's the religion that's on all continents already and has been there ever since the flood and before. It's the original religion of rebellion, just as Babel was rebellion against God with the Babel religion. That's why it's the Babylonian religion of the end time. That's the allegory. We need to understand that, you know, probably what would be the population of the world that would worship a polytheist religion today? At least half, right? Because I'm eliminating seculars from the West out. It already is sort of dominating the world, right? And the monotheist religions would maybe account for 3 billion people.
Yeah,
So
and
at least
there's already a drive. I think we talked about this on the last part where you know, Gnostics, Christians are moving up in rank right now. Not moving up in rank, I would say, but moving in numbers. And they believe in Mother Earth. They believe in all these different. They're becoming polytheistic as well.
Yep.
And it is moving pretty heavily. We're going to be talking probably more about that on Saturday, but with David Carrico. But it's interesting, man. And you know, one thing that I love about you, Gary Wayne, is that you tie in all these things together. And I know I've said that already tonight, but most people, when they think of stuff, the Illuminati is all there is. But Illuminati, yep, only one out of I don't know how many branches of this,
yep,
these tentacles that reach out across the world. I mean, it's just a small portion.
Well, it's important to understand that, because in everything, I don't tend to deviate, that you have this organizational structure of Nephilim and Nephilim descendants. You have the pantheon of fallen angels. You have the 7 sacred sciences, and you have the same mystical religion that always works in tandem. And it's there, it's everywhere. It just doesn't separate. It's always there. And so for people to ignore that, I think opens yourself up to the of being deceived. I'm open to whatever the end time religion is going to be. I just believe it probably is going to be this ancient polytheism, because it just makes sense, because it's going to be like the days of Noah, both before and after the flood. That includes Babel. It is the religion that Enoch, the evil son of Cain, invents. It has the 7 sciences. Sciences is becoming the new religion of the world today, with its values and standards that's going to harmonize with polytheism in the end time, that I believe. And going back to Daniel again, we understand that this 10 world empire is more than just a few countries of the West. We understand now that this could possibly be bloodlines and a mixture of humans and Nephilim bloodlines, or 2 components to this that come around the world. And China would be one of those blocks of nations. and Japan might be the other one. And that's why it was nice for you to mention the Japanese Yamamoto dynasty as well. And it's good that we were able to talk about that, because that might be that Asia Pacific trade bloc. So you have two of those that will have all these other countries underneath that become the kings of the East for the Armageddon battle, right? So once you start to understand it in a bigger sort of context than just a North American context or a European context, your eyes begin to open. And I know there's a lot of thought that the 13 families are just European, or now they have like the Rockefellers and Rothschilds and Warburgs and some of those ones. I don't believe that that's the case. I believe there's 13 bloodlines that come out of Europe. I believe there's the pseudo blue bloods that have been intermarrying and trying to ennoble their bloodlines, but there are other bloodlines that are going to come into fruition as being part of these kings or strongmen of the end time. And I think, I don't think we can take Putin back to the Romanov dynasty. So when I look at that iron and clay, he may be one of those strong men, if we were to have the end time in the next 10 years, who may not have noble blood, right?
Interesting. And so, we talked to, I think me and you were once talking about the Club of Rome one time, how they have, they have people from all over the world, and it's a very powerful elite club of people. And it's very interesting.
Yeah, so the Club of Rome was formed in the 60s, and it was formed with the ultimate goal to bring about world government. And it answers directly to the purebloods, or the higher end aspect of the Rosicrucians. Okay, and they're made up of very powerful people. And what they're trying to do, and they already in the 70s split the world up into 10 blocks of nations, or 10 groups of nations, or trading blocks, as they tried to make it form through EEC and NAFTA and things like that. And we were seeing a pushback on that right now, but as CNN likes to say with their fake news over and over and over and over and over, the globalist ship has already sailed and you can't put it back to port. However it's going to be a group of nations, whether it's trading blocks or spheres of influence or combination of each. And it's probably going to be fairly similar to what the Club of Rome have already set up, because they based that on being the new Atlantis, which was the helm of world government in the antediluvian epoch, where it was Poseidon was the god who mated with human females to create 10 Titan demigod kings, and was trying to conquer the whole world. Now, Plato and Critias and Timaeus will tell us that the Athenians checked them in the antediluvian world, but that was the golden age. That's the age they want to bring back. And it's no coincidence that they want to set up the 10 Atlantean Empire, and people like Bacon and Rosicrucians like them, and everybody sort of in the occult field want to set up the new Atlantis. You have to understand the allegories and the connections in the religion.
Yeah, because if you read the book that Francis Bacon wrote, it's almost like he's setting up the playbook for everything that's happening right now with the Club of Rome and all these. Like you said, I think there's going to be the financial systems, there's going to be the nation systems. They're all going to be playing hand in hand. But you're right, yes. The Club of Rome has set this up perfectly almost. And of course, anything could happen with them. But for right now, like, to me, the most suspect group of people that are really doing the most to make this happen is them. Is there any other groups that you can think of that are doing as much as they are to make this happen?
No, because they're taking the lead. The other ones are doing smaller parts, like the Trilateral Commission would work together to make the superpowers work for world government. CFR works in total support of the globalist movement. So everybody's working underneath, but it is these very powerful people, and they have a hubris about them that they believe they have the solutions to solve the world's problems, but you have to form into this world government. And and they're the ones who created these concepts that we've become very familiar with, like overpopulation, peak oil, global warming, to help cattle herd people into world government, right? It doesn't have to be true. They just need ideas and ideologies that transcend borders that will drive people into the open arms of the globalists. And so they need to scare you all the time that we're going to wipe ourselves from the face of the earth, as was the fear at Babel, unless you come together under a universal world government and a universal religion, just as it was at Babel. Again, follow the allegories, because it's them who is bringing about the end time. It's not the Christians. It's not the Jewish people, right? It's the polytheists. And they want this end time. And the only thing that prevents them from doing it sooner than later is the restrainer, whether that be the Holy Spirit or Michael, whoever the restrainer is. Until the restrainer is moved, try as they may, it's not going to happen. So they'll accept the ordained times, and then they'll do things very quickly, because there will be nothing stopping them from pulling it all together. And in the meantime, they're going to get pushed back a little bit, like what we're seeing right now. So understand, they want this rendezvous. They want this rendezvous with destiny because they want humankind to be totally enslaved and to take a stand against God and to fight for their freedom, just as the fallen angels are going to do in the end time, as again shown in Revelation 12. And so this will be a time where you will have to pick and choose, and you will have to swear your loyalty. And not making a decision is making a decision. So you'll either be slaughtered at the time, but even if you don't make a decision, you're not going to be saved by God and Jesus, because they'll spit you out because you're lukewarm.
There's no doubt about that. And you said something pretty key, and I think a lot of people need to really understand this. They're pushing us to this, and this is something that when we see these wars, we see these people that are supposedly against each other, knowing that they're. I mean, of course, most of us that are open, our eyes are open. We realize these people are from the same organization and club. So a lot of this stuff that they do out in the open is kind of just to rile up what they call chattel, the cattle, us. They rile us up to see these different things happen because they need us for their wars. They need us for all these different things. But, I guess the most amazing thing to me is that when I watch the news, and it's hard. And of course, I think they're projecting what they're doing. I think they're projecting what they're doing on there. But when I see stuff like, oh, we just bombed over here, they don't have to tell us that. They don't have to tell any of that stuff. They have no if you're in war and you do something to somebody that's big, you don't go around talking about it. You don't even, you don't want them to know this is the art of war. You don't want them to know everything that you're doing, every move you're making, but we see it on TV because they want us to see it. And we in a little bit about Albert Pike, we talked about him before, but he had this design for World War III to rouse up the Zionists versus the Muslims and do all these different things. And keep in mind that they're making this stuff happen. They're making this riled up thing happen. It's not because and yes, the Muslims have in certain writings, they have ideas that would cause you to want to go to war with the non-believer. And if you read the Old Testament, there's the same kind of thing going on there. But most of these people, you're not driven to kill other people merely by some words, unless there's all-out war being taken upon your people. And I know that people would disagree with me and say, well, the Muslims or the Zionists, they all have these war cry things that are going on in their texts, which some of them do. But the thing is, when people are happy and enjoying life, they're not likely to kill people. But when you're over there nerve gassing their children, bombing their children, you're doing the same thing over in Israel, you're doing all these different things, it's easy to kind of rile up this idea of war. So if you could talk a little bit about how this is like a big soap opera, or at least what's your opinion. You may not agree with me, but your opinion on the whole thing, because I think people need to understand not to get worked up, because it's a sign of things to come. So
yeah, well, understand that anarchy is part of this left-wing movement, and the way they create change is through anarchy and instability. So you have anarchy on the extreme left, and then just right of that is communism, and just right of that is National Socialism, then progressivism, and then liberalism as you move to the center. And so anarchy around the world is what they need to lower the aspirations of people of that they can continue in this manner and will welcome the global solution, right? So, and you're doing a number of things when you're doing this as well, because you have all three religions in the Middle East. You are lowering the credibility of the monotheist religions by inspiring wars between them, whether it's the Jews and the Muslims or it's the Christians and the Muslims, that it becomes a complete belief system of violence, right? So expect that to spread over to the Christians, especially when we get closer and we start to protest loudly against the New World Order, the new religion, or and later the Antichrist. That we will be considered like the Muslims, extremists, just as all monotheists will be extremists, right? So they can lower that credibility, but in the meantime, have this spread across borders out of fear. And all the solutions that will be presented, whether it's through funding both sides of a war or environmentalism or a nuclear catastrophe or economic collapse, the only solutions will be presented will be globalist solutions. That means we have to work together. Borders have to come down. You already hear it. You can't be a populist. You can't be a nationalist. It's all over everywhere, that nationalism, because you're proud of your country and you don't want open borders. Well, now you're an extremist, right? So, and just as they're calling in the French election today, and I can't remember the name of the male who is running, that wants to stay in Europe and wants open borders. He's called a centrist. Well, that is extreme leftism. And Le Pen, who is called extreme right, who's actually quite central and left to center on some of her social and economic policies, because she doesn't want immigration and she's questioning the EEC. She's an extreme right. And people don't dig in to say, well, what do they believe in? They just accept what the media says. They're going to do that to you. They're going to do that to me. And that's going to be the case. So we're going to be the extremists that need to be slaughtered. And again, we're just cattle to them. So it makes no difference. And if we need to be slaughtered to be taken out of the way, that's what's going to happen. And also, you have that allegory we're talking about with the New Atlantis with Francis Bacon. Well, in the New Atlantis, you have science and this universal polytheist religion working together in harmony, which it can, because polytheism is the one that created the perversion of the development of knowledge, and then the Rosicrucians and Freemasons, who are polytheist and secret society, create the Royal Society, which creates modern science. Understand, this is the same belief system that is coming, and that's why you are seeing science raised to a religious status where every measuring stick, value, and otherwise is measured against science. It is the new religion that's going to be part of the polytheist religion, because they always have been.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And you know, you're right. When you say they'll take us out, there's no question about that, because really in most of these religions, they believe that Christianity is a disease. Belief in the Messiah is a disease, because really that's the one of the, obviously it's the only way to the Father according to the scripture. But we are the thing, you know, the Holy Spirit through us, or whatever you want to call it. We're holding it back because we're calling out all these things that are happening all over the world. And it's amazing to see, and I've already started to see, I don't know about you, Gary, but I've seen so much hate recently, and so many people just bashing, threatening, all these things to what we do. And I consider us, you know, a dot on the map of all the people out there doing things. But I've seen a lot of that lately, more than normal. It's just in 2017, it's been absolutely overwhelming. But people are starting to hate the God of the Old Testament. They're starting to hate anything that he's about. They're starting to hate everything that has morals that they don't agree with. And we're seeing this happen. And I think you're right. Once they actually create chaos, anarchy, it's going to be really easy for people that aren't grounded in the Messiah to go over to whatever the Antichrist brings up in the end.
Well, for a number of reasons. And first of all, and I coined in my book the word left-wing fascism, and fascism has been sort of misinformation and brainwashed to people as being a right-wing philosophy. Well, guess what? National Socialism is left-wing, and Mussolini, who starts fascism in Italy, who's credited with, but isn't really the founder of it, he was communist before he decided to take over the country. So again, it comes out of left-wing belief system. And we see this fascism taking place today. We see it, it's absolutely brainwashed people on campuses and universities, and the fascism and lack of free speech and the persecution to the point of violence and rioting and threatening people speaking with a different point of view, unless it's the tolerated view, is basically the rule of the land on universities. So with the millennials, we're at this tipping edge of fascist thought. They don't call it fascism. They don't realize it is, because they're not critically asking the right questions, probably because they're brainwashed. But they need to start asking those questions. So that's coming at us. And so certainly Christianity is going to be more and more in that line of sight for fascist oppression and persecution. And then they're going to attack Jesus's deity status, which they've done lightly around the edges, and they're going to come out with what they have as so-called proof that he didn't die on the cross, and probably his descendants, as it mixes into these bloodlines for Antichrist. And they're going to attack Paul as being the evil liar and the heretic that the Essenes talk about in the Dead Sea Scrolls, because they believe, Essenes and polytheists and Gnostics believe, that it was Paul who raised Jesus to deity status, that nobody else talked about it before that, even in the four Gospels. And of course, the Gospels that were written from the Qumran community and the Mandaeans and the other polytheist groups around the time of Jesus are all coming out now, showing the other aspect recorded about Jesus in the Gnostic Gospels, which is polytheism, because they can't recognize him as the Son of God, but they can recognize him as a prophet. So they're going to attack Christianity with mind-blowing evidence that they'll call as so-called evidence, because it'll be false, but they're going to prove to most people who are easily deceived that Jesus isn't the Messiah, so that they can make way for Antichrist as the false Messiah. Yep. And once you've eliminated Jesus, the Muslims already want to lower Jesus to prophet status, right? And the Jewish people are willing to accept Jesus as a prophet, but not as the Messiah, right? So even within the monotheist religions around the world, it's prime for that attack. They're going to have to take the legs out of Jesus' deity status to make it work. They're going to shatter Christianity to a point, but not totally dismiss it, because as we understand this universal religion and the false prophet, that this will be a religion that has two horns like a lamb. So it has a Christian veneer, but it speaks like a dragon. Again, that is very specific language, so you understand the religion of the dragon, which is the fallen seraphim angels, which is polytheism, which is Babel, which is Enochian mysticism.
Interesting. I guess, when you put it together and when you really look at what's going on, it's very important to kind of just know where the deception lies. I know that we see a lot of things happening, Gary. In the Bible, it talks about, as it was in the days of Noah. We see a real push for the idea of changing of DNA. We see a real push for evolution, the evolution of humanity. We see transhumanism on the rise. We see cloning. We see all these interesting things. And then there's this alien deception going on as well. How it all kind of, it's interesting how it all kind of plays in together. Yep. I know it's not what this show is about, but I would appreciate it, just in case there's people that are listening. This alien deception where we see, and we see it in movies. We see it in movies, Gary. We see these gods coming down. There's a new movie coming out called a show coming out on Showtime called American Gods, I believe it's called. I don't know if you've seen that, but it's basically about these new forms of gods and you see the Marvel comic movies where these gods are basically coming down and you know, doing all these different things. How easy would it to be to deceive people when you see all this alien stuff, you see all this superhero things, and you see something coming down out of the clouds, and it's not Jesus, it's not Yeshua? What do you know, what is going to happen? There's so many deceptions, and that's why we do these shows. A lot of people are like, oh, you should be talking about, you know, the weightier matters of scripture. You should be talking about all these different things. But the thing is, these are, to me, these are weightier matters. These are weighty matters. These are not the only weighty matters, but these are important because, like you said, people are going to be easily deceived by a lot of
Yep.
this, especially people that have been involved in the culture of America, the culture of all these different cultural aspects of what's going on, the
Yep.
media. And so if you talk a little bit about that before we go into questions, I'd appreciate it. And if there's anything else you want to cover on the Chinese part, we didn't really get into, like the Great Wall of China. We didn't get into where those dynasties are now, and with North Korea and China and all these different things and prophecy kind of going on right now. It's pretty interesting. But
yeah, I mean, it's the larger point with the Chinese thing that they have the bloodlines and they dominate the ruling class of most of the Southeast nations, and that's heavily, you know, a couple bloodlines to be aware of is the Zhu line, the Li line, and the Yamamoto line. Those are the bloodlines of the East that all take themselves back to the seraphims and the dragons, right, and the gods. And so when we're talking about all these movies, you just can't watch all of these movies because there's so many of them to analyze, but they're all brainwashing and prepping people for these great revelations and deceptions that are going to come in the end time. And these delusions and deceptions are so great that it's going to deceive even the elect, if that were possible, which obviously it is because it's been prophesied to do that. So we're not going to even be able to believe the leaders of the churches, right? Unless the only thing you're going to be able to rely on is literalist Christian interpretation of the Bible. That's it. Everything else is not going to be something you can rely on. You can expect that aliens of some sort are going to be part of it, because just take the Catholic Church, which I think is going to be part of the universal religion and centered in Rome, just my take on it, is already ready to baptize and take in aliens into the religion, right? I mean, how can you get more universal? How about universe religion? I mean, it is, you know, into the Nephilim world order, or the NWO, as I like to call it. So these deceptions are going to be so large, and our church leaders, and I think most of them, are already molded and or will be easily swayed. And so they'll be leading Christians away and into this new religion. So watch out. This brainwashing is pervasive, whether it's in the media, whether it's in the schools, or it's in the entertainment, and it's turning distinctly fascist in its implementation. So it's going to be increasingly more difficult to hold on to your beliefs publicly. And so as we move forward, you've got this whole thing sort of coming about. And when we look at what's going on with the CERN event, and we look at Revelation 7 and the release of these fallen angels coming out of the abyss, this is one of those key sort of points for the end time, with these strange scorpion beasts, which are, I think, fallen angels and allegories of fallen angels and demons, or they're another form of demon thing that was created through these great technologies and copulation with different types of beings by the fallen angels in the antediluvian period that were locked away in the abyss. But all this is going to be taking place. Spectacular, mind-boggling events, along with attack on Christianity and Christians. What's interesting about what's going on with this CERN thing is, and John, I don't know if you ever talked about the God connection back to CERN.
We've talked about CERN a number of times, but it's been a while. If you want to mention that, that would be great. I know, you know, we know China's building a collider as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is being done with interdimensional technology, so with quantum computers. And the only thing you need quantum computers for is to deal in other dimensions. And so the CERN idea that people have gravitated to is they're trying to create a portal, likely to the abyss, but certainly into other dimensions, to bring these ancient gods back. Well, and in Revelation 7, we have an angel falling from the sky who has a key that's going to open up the abyss. And one wonders whether or not that's Azazel, that is going to have the key, or he's the one that's going to be released out of the abyss. And what's interesting about that is that you can actually take the name CERN, yes, it has a lot of Eastern mysticism in it, but let's take it back to sort of Western polytheism. And you actually have a god that's a Druid Celtic god called Cernunnos, which is Cernunnos. And this is a horn god, a god of the forest, a god of fertility, god of the underworld, and is known as the Horned One. And it'd be very, very similar to also Herne the Hunter out of Celtic or British polytheism, the Green Man, and several other names maybe out of Ireland. It would be Vindus, would be a very similar god in that. And this seems to be the same god that was in the Etruscan and Roman pantheon, where it doesn't have the added letters on the end of the word CERN. It was just called the god CERN, C-E-R-N. And this too is a stag god of the forest and a fertility god. And it's when you see images of Cernunnos or the CERN god, it has the same imagery as Baphomet and Azazel. So it's the same god-looking individual. And this is also the same Roman god CERN as the god in Greece that we would know as Pan. And if people don't know who the god Pan is the same description that we talked about before. This was a god that was a devil god who played a flute. That's why you have the allegories of Peter Pan and the green outfit that Peter Pan wears. He flies at night with his private parts erect to seduce young women and nymphs. So he wants to create Nephilim. It's a fertility god of the woodlands. He has pointed ears. So do these other depictions of CERN and Cernunnos. It's the same god as Robin, Goodfellow, and Puck out of Midsummer's Night Dream. He was the son of Zeus, and some legends have it also as son of Dionysus. It was like a night-flying oupierre or a vampire or a witch. And we have this analogy that goes all back to CERN as one of the names, Roman and Druidic, and we have that name applied to the technology that is likely going to be developed to tap into the abyss. And again, you have to understand the allegories and their pantheons and how they apply them for everything, and you can just follow the crumbs all the way through.
Yeah, it's amazing. And you know, the fact that China is building even bigger collider is kind of interesting as well. I know that I don't know where they're at on that. I haven't looked at it lately, but you see all these names. I mean, we talked about the emperor that had the Pan in his name, and you see these things popping up all over the place. And I just want to reiterate one more thing. If you guys have not gotten Genesis 6 Conspiracy, you won't be disappointed. You really need to understand how all this stuff works together. I think this book probably encompasses, Gary, you could have wrote a 10-part book there for sure. It's a very thick book, but it has everything, pretty much everything in it. And I know you're even adding stuff. You said you're writing articles that are adding things to it, but it pretty much has everything you need to kind of understand how all these things play together. And I think it's needed. You have a lot of people out there promoting certain aspects of it, but they don't give the whole picture. And I know for somebody like me, I needed the whole picture. I needed to really see how this all, because you see these different gods and these different things. You're like, how does it work together? And when you realize that they're likely all the same kind of entities. And you see Genesis 6, how these angels come down. It kind of all encompasses this entire network of mythology right in one scripture or one chapter in the scripture. So
yeah, and what I also am hearing so much more of these days is people, it's a long read. It's going to take you a while, and you have to do it in bites because there's so much information in there. But I'm getting contact from a lot of people who have been kind enough to purchase my book and read it, are saying they're on their second and third read of it, and they're actually finding the second read is better than the first read because now they understand it better from the beginning, and now they start seeing things and remembering things that they didn't see before on the first read. So it really is designed to connect the dots of what was, what is, and what's going to happen in a way that you can start decoding in front of you what's going on, and that's the key. So sorry to take such a long plug for my book, but appreciate the opportunity to do so, John.
no, I think it's awesome. I mean, we've given away several of the Genesis 6 conspiracy books on this show because we do. I love it, man. When I first started reading it, I've read it through, and I need to read it again. I you know, it's one of those books that you're right. I mean, you can't just sit because your brain will go in overload if you sit.
Yes.
And read all the way through it. I tried to do it at the airport. Tried to read through it because I had like 6-hour overlays, and I read about halfway through it, and I felt like my brain was going to explode because of all the stuff. So I had to kind of go back over it again slowly. But it's an amazing book. And before we get into questions, we got about 10 minutes before we get into questions. What do you think about the Great Wall, and what do you think they were trying to hold back? I mean, do you think it was Nephilim?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they were still in the sort of far reaches of civilization, and we know a lot of the Nephilim would have been driven to North America and other parts of the world as they were driven out of sort of the epicenter of the Middle East, right? So I think it's very likely that they were afraid of the viciousness of the Nephilim and probably their size. And you know, you wouldn't think that, you know, if you look at where China borders Russia there, I mean, that's off in the middle of nowhere, right? And so if you're going to build a border there, a wall there, a defensive wall, military defensive wall, there just wasn't that great of need unless there was this other force that's unaccounted for. Right.
Yeah,
And
a lot of normal humans wouldn't habitate in those areas. I mean, if you look at the areas, it's not highly habitated.
even today, like you get across the other side and into Russia, it's there's not much there.
Exactly. All right. Well, if you want, we'll go ahead and get in questions early. We never usually get through all of them unless there's something else you wanted to add before we get into them.
No, I think that's good. I think it's it just puts in another piece of the puzzle for the people to start understanding, and nails that sort of consistency of story and allegory that's around the world.
All right. Well, we'll get into the first question. Kevin sent this over from YouTube. It says, please ask Gary if he thinks that the modern Japan could be a seat for the coming Nephilim kings.
If the modern Japan could be a seat, was that
yes,
S-E-A-T?
A seat. Yep.
I'm not sure what they mean by a seat for. I don't envision Japan as being the center for the Nephilim kings. I know if you get into sort of a cultic sort of modern history, you know, during the Commonwealth Empire of Britain, that you would have these meetings over in Japan of the great sort of white brotherhood, secret government of the world at the time. But I don't see that Japan has any sort of historical super importance, right? It's not the center of the world. It's not where things were happening. And as I was explaining in terms of when the Japanese dynasty starts, that's really 600 BC best case scenario. There were people there before, but nothing of significance. And really, it's more like 200 BC for the Yamamoto dynasty. So I think it's too recent of a dynasty to hold that sort of pedigree. And I think, no, it's not going to be where they're going to be seated. I think, you know, I'm not sure where they're going to want to meet, but I suspect they're going to meet in Europe, and I suspect it's Rome. I think Rome's going to be the city of power before the 10 kings grow too jealous of it and destroy not only the city, but the universal religion and its economic empire of the first half of the last 3.5 years. You're going to find that in Revelations, where they gang up on the people. Right. That's also when they take down 3 of the kings. So 3 of the empires are going to fall. I think those are the Western democracies, because they're going to distribute the plunder. And I think that's the rich nations, and I think that's the West.
I agree with you. When it talks about Babylon falling, and I don't know where you're at on this, but it talks about the merchants of the world, or and it's become a habitation of all foul spirits. I agree with you on that. There's a lot of people that may not agree, but I totally agree with you on that. I think I've placed this idea of America being Babylon, just the fact that we have the largest military base in physical Babylon that there is. I mean, we cover that whole area. It's an interesting thing.
Yeah, it's going to be a religious center, Babylon, right, and a city, and it's going to control world trade. And if you read secret society documents, they're going to take a tribute on every transaction that happens in the world. And that's why Babylon grows so powerful. And that's why the 10 empires will grow jealous, because of the tribute that it's taking. And then it will turn on Babylon and destroy it, and it'll be replaced by a new religion of Antichrist and direct worship of him as either God or as the son of Lucifer. Not sure, quite sure about that one, but he's going to be raised up like a god for sure. And that happens after the abomination, right? So again, that's the last 3.5 years.
Right. And one more question to go along with this whole idea. So when we see North Korea, we see the things happening with them. We see the things happen with China. Where do they play? Where does North Korea, or do they play into this whole thing?
Well, that's going to be part of the Chinese sphere of influence. Right. And you can see they're building bases out into the Chinese Sea, and that's why there's so much concern over there. They're already building that process for being one of those important last 10 kings. And I think we're going to have an event, possibly with a country like North Korea, that's going to accelerate the cattle herding of us into the end time, with a nuclear event perhaps coming out of Korea. But it will take some of those sort of catastrophes, man-made catastrophes, maybe even false flag catastrophes, to deceive people in a way to accept world government, because they need to drive them into the arms of the globalists, right? That's how they're going to bring this about. And it's going to be part of the end-time religion that negotiates the final deal that will also protect the sovereignty and protection of Israel, right? So this is going to be distinctly part of it, but it's going to take catastrophic things to make that happen.
Agreed. Next question is from Lynette, and Lynette's she listens to all the time, and it was nice meeting Lynette at the conference. She says, speaking of bloodlines, does Gary Wayne or anyone think it is odd that the group like Ancestry.com are pushing DNA testing?
Well, I think whether it's blood banks for and blood typing and DNA is all data for setting up the New World Order and what they're going to do. Because again, this is going to be an intolerant society, and literally they don't want most mundane humans, right? So they want to track your genealogy back to having DNA of the Nephilim, however strong or whatever that cutoff point is, and you have the right blood types, and they want to know who's the cattle, right? We also already know from the Georgia Guidestones, from the Rosicrucian Manifesto there, that's a bit of an ad lib on my end, but they want to limit the population to 500 million. Those are 500 million with the gene of Isis and the spark of the divine, or the 1,000 points of light, as they like to talk about it in their belief system. It's not about the believers of God. It's not about Christians. It's about who they want to live in their new dystopia.
I totally agree with that. It's a scary thought, but you're exactly right. For those that haven't seen the guidestones, can you let people know what those are? I mean, because we may have some completely new people to this.
Yeah, so there's these guidestones that were these big, large sort of rock sort of tablet formations that were set up, and very mysteriously, nobody really knows who they set it up, but they've got sort of a plan for what they envision the world to be, right, and what has to happen. And it is literally doctrine right out of Rosicrucian doctrines. So Google it and find out what's in it. And it does pop up on some television shows, but not that often. And nobody takes it down. Nobody knows how or why it was really erected or who really did it. I mean, there's some false identities associated with it that lead you down an investigative rabbit hole that you'll never come out of, but nobody really takes credit for it. It just appears out of nowhere. But again, it's there. It gets all of this attention. And again, it's part of the preparation and the brainwashing.
Yes, it's a very interesting thing. So Valerie asked, isn't Ishnu in the Bible?
Isn't Vishnu in the Bible? Is that V-I-S-H-N?
I-S-H-N-U.
Yeah. If Vishnu is mentioned in the Bible, I'm not aware of it. Now, there are other gods that are mentioned in the Bible, but I'm not aware of Vishnu being mentioned in the Bible whatsoever in any of the translations. And I use 6 or 7 different English translations. So the only place I've come across Vishnu is in Zoroastrianism, Arianism, and in the Sanskrit Vedas.
Are you still with us, Gary? We lost Gary again. So when he comes back, we'll talk about it. I was looking up. I was muted and I didn't realize it, but I was looking up the Vishnu, and I'm not seeing any biblical scriptures for it. But I, like Gary said, there are plenty of other things that are associated with it. I'm not seeing the scripture. If you have it and you'd like to bring it up, the scripture that has Vishnu in there, please do. So, anyways, Gary, we'll go on to the next question. Stacy asks, what about the fiery serpents they encounter in the wilderness in Deuteronomy 8:15? Were they just poisonous snakes? You're muted, Gary. I can't hear you. Or maybe your mic's not working properly, but I can't hear you at all. So we'll wait for Gary to get back on here. But I believe we covered a little bit about there. I think he was talking about it in a different book, but I've talked to Gary about it before, and he believes that the fiery serpents are, as in fact, dragon beings, I think. And we'll ask him when he gets back on here. I don't know exactly what's going on with his microphone. But yes, I believe that that is the same exact thing that is going on. And anyways, we'll go on to the next question for a second. When he gets back, there he goes. He's going off and hopefully coming back on. Sometimes the internet around when you're doing interviews like this over the internet and their video at the same time, there are issues, and that happens. Unfortunately, I know if I get a hard storm, I have issues like crazy. That's just what happens in these type interviews. And it'd be nice to have in studio interviews, but this is a great way to be able to interview people from across the world. Gary, for instance, in Vancouver, to be able to speak with him is pretty amazing. And so, yeah. And, I just want to make sure people that are new to this stuff understand what we're talking about here. Just in case you just joined us, we're talking about an event that happened in Genesis 6, and we're talking about this world deception that's going on. So anyways, Gary's back again. I hear you this time, Gary.
You can hear me now. I changed headsets and mics, so.
I can hear you, but not very loud. I'm going to turn you up here on the master here. Speak to me for a second.
Yeah. So how's that sounding? I know on this old mic you have to turn it up. So.
Yeah, it's working. So there we go. Let me go on to the next question here, Gary. Actually, the fiery serpents one. If you want to, I spoke for you, which I could be wrong, but I believe you believe Deuteronomy 8:15 are talking about fiery serpents as well.
Yes, they are. And anytime we have that sort of reference back to fiery serpents, that's a direct sort of connection back to the seraphim angels that were known as fiery serpents created in the serpents. But I'm gonna have to check that back in Deuteronomy to see whether or not serpents goes back to Nakash or seraphim. I haven't checked that.
It's seraph. The word is, because I remember getting kicked out of a Bible study. It was weird just because I said, "Hey, it's the same word as seraph in this book," and they're like, "Well, that's not what we're talking about here, and we're not here to dig in. We got a time limit. We're meeting on this Bible study." And so, anyways, it kind of ended rough in the end. But yeah, I'm pretty sure it's the same exact word there, but I could be wrong. I'd have to look back, and I may be thinking about Exodus, to be honest with you. That's very possible. So anyways, we'll go on to the next question from Brian. Has Gary heard of East Asian mythology of Dangun? Tin Jiri, I could be pronouncing any of this very wrong. Dangun was born to Wanung and bear turned human woman. Dangun is father of Altai people, I believe. I could pronounce all that wrong. I have no idea. I'm horrible with Asian names. So
yeah, I'm thinking that's more Southeast Asian, but no, I haven't dug too deep into that. I mean, there are just so many, but again, they all tell the same story. Every time I take one, whether it comes out of Central or South America or out of Asia or India, I mean, once you start to read it all and any accompanying information on it, it all starts to talk about the same story, the same allegory. So that one, I could be wrong, but it seems to me it's Southeast Asia, but no, I have not dug very deep into that.
All right.
I guess I haven't dug deep into it at all.
Well, at least you admit it. Some people might try to wing it on there. So let's go to the next question then. Alec asks, did the sons of God create beings in their own image? Because you have to account of man being created in chapter 1 and 2.
Well, I think with every type of creation they were trying to create, and however they created it, they were creating it with their own image in mind, because again, that's the arrogance and the pride and the hubris. So I think when they copulate with humans and they create Nephilim and they look just like them and they have a serpent face, that's part of it. But let's go a little bit deeper than that, and let's just say that and again, it doesn't really matter whether or not you believe dinosaurs were in, before the flood or even before that. Seems to me that these saurian reptilian beings, and now we see these beings they're being decorated with feathers now, right? Not just these lizard animals. And if you go back to that plumed serpent, feathered serpent, seraphim imagery we were talking about earlier, I think dinosaurs, and again, they're giant monsters again, right? For the most part, I think that fits perfectly in with what a watcher would create. Whether or not it's what God wanted them to create, without getting into the argument as to when that is, I think that's part of creating things after their own image, right? And I think if you look at the Nakash or the serpent in the Eden, and we understand that this Nakash was an intelligent being, and it could speak because it spoke in Eden, and it walked on 2 legs, and in other accounts, some of them even had wings, as being like a mammal or an animal dragon, and it was the most craftiest, smartest, and intelligent animal. And in the occult belief system, in the Gnostics actually believe it was a king-like being, and part of the Messianic sort of allegory and understanding. So I think the serpent that was that intelligent was its favored being as well after their own image. I think you carry that all the way through, absolutely.
It's interesting too. I know you've probably talked about this, but what America means and what does that mean, Gary? Have you looked into that?
No, I haven't.
Supposedly it means land of the plumed serpent. America does, which is interesting. So,
yeah. Well, and again, you know, it makes sense because if you look at totem poles, for example, what are they showing? There's these feathered, flying, godlike creatures, right? And you've got these other flying gods that go all through sort of native history and religions. And they also have this accounting of the White Snake clan that starts their civilization, which is the same people that the Quiché Maya and the Aztecs take their mythology or their history and the religion back to. That would have been, they would have been worshiping the plumed serpent and the feathered serpent, right? And then you have all of these serpent mounds and things that are all through North America. To me, it would be shocking not to find that as being a direct correlation back.
Exactly. All right, we'll go on to the next question here. Okay, so Brian says, I wonder if and I could be pronouncing this one wrong, but the Shangu or Zangu or the Huns were Nephilim descendants described because they were described as being very tall. Do you know anything about that?
Well, again, I think those bloodlines, and you get the Mongols, and they're in that northern part, and also part of the walls, and yeah, they are significantly larger than the average Chinese even today. I think there's bloodlines that do run through there, just as to what you were referring to earlier, John. Absolutely.
It's interesting the way they did a total takeover as well. The Mongolians and the Huns and all that, just massive takeover. That's not done, in my opinion, by normal people. What do you think about that, Gary? I mean, that's not something that normal humans do, unless you look at Israel and the scriptures where it was actually done. It says the Lord of hosts or Yahovah Sabaoth went before them and did this stuff. This isn't a normal task for people that are humans. Am I right?
Yeah, I agree with what they accomplished and how much territory they took and how quickly. It's not just from being a good warrior. It's not just from riding very well on a horse and being able to shoot arrows from a horse. I think that is a rewrite of history. There's more going on there. I think they were superior warriors, but also due to size. But I have nothing from depictions or anything that I can really prove, but that's my speculation. But people feared them, and they like to intermarry with the Mongols, and they have such a legacy of intermarriage right through Europe and stuff. And again, it's one of those dynasties that never sort of gets out of the news and stuff. I think there's more to it than we've been told. And I think, again, we learn more about those Eastern bloodlines as we get closer to the end time.
Right on. And I don't know if you know anything about this, but we got a couple more questions, but I wanted to ask you, have you heard anything about, and we talk about the seven sacred sciences, what they use to rule. Have you heard anything about a book and supposedly, and I can't think of the name of it right now, but there's a book that all kings get that teaches them how to command control over people by use of all different types of sorcery, I guess you could say. Have you heard anything about that, or is that something that you've studied?
Nothing that I've been able to get my hands on to put any substantiation to. It's referenced a little here and there, but I don't have enough meat to sort of say that it is, and that's what they're going to be doing. But I think if you have this many millennia of ruling, you have a handbook for the rulers, and they believe they have the divine right to rule that comes from the gods, right? So I think all of this sort of goes hand in hand, but again, I'm speculating. But I do believe that they are able to and are initiated and trained to do things that when they want to, and when they're ready, is going to make them look superior.
Right on. Okay, so Alec has another question. He says, I have a question for Gary. Is the 4 dragon gods of China, is that possible that they are the 4 horsemen of Revelation 6?
Very possible. Absolutely very possible. And these angels are chained, if I'm getting the right reference here. And so why would an angel be chained? If he is, it's probably a fallen angel, right, to be released in the end time. And we know the seraphims were dragons. So it makes sense. I mean, again, there's nothing that you can specifically nail down to, but again, the coincidence is too much to ignore. So I think, yes, I think that is possibly the case.
All right. Next question's from Shelley. Gary, what do you think of the thought that the NWO knows we are looking for the false Messiah, so they'll not only send him, they'll also give us a real Messiah, also fake, after the false one?
Well, we're told there's going to be many false messiahs in the end time. So whether or not that is part of their plan to do or not, it's hard to know. Certainly, I hadn't looked at it from that perspective, Shelley, that that could be that when the true one comes out, it would be so much superior to what everybody saw before that it might be easier to accept, I suppose. But I always found it odd that there was going to be in the end time so many false messiahs, right? And we also have Antichrist, and that's not one of those sort of subtleties and mysteries I've really sort of resolved. I understand there's going to be many false prophets too, but I understand those are probably different than false messiahs, although maybe they are one and the same. But again, I can't link the two. So it could be also this competing as we approach, because all religions have this Messiah type of prophecy in them, whether it's Lord Maitreya or New Buddha or the Mahdi, or so you may have competing from different religions as we get closer to the end time, trying to make a claim as Antichrist, which just adds to more confusion, anarchy, wars, calamities, and then along comes Antichrist when nobody's expecting him to do the peace deal, and brings in the New World Order with the universal religion. So the first half, not his religion after he destroys, partners with the 10 kings to get rid of Babylon. So that may be a possibility, but again, I unless somebody else has something really definitive on that, that part's a little bit open-ended in my opinion. But I think we do have to look towards the idea that there are all of these messiahs promised by all of these different factions of polytheism.
Right, and I like what you said earlier in the show, that the only sphere of truth that we can trust is the scripture, because without that, we are headlong falling into a spike full of deception, or a pit full of deception. And
and these false prophets and these false Christs are going to do miracles, and they're going to obviously have oratory powers that are spectacular. And they're going to easily play to, it may have more difficulty crossing over to other cultures and religions around the world, but certainly locally it could have a big impact. So you could have so many of those just from the various nuances of polytheism around the world.
Right on. So this next question is a very interesting question, because honestly, this is one of the most confusing subjects in the scripture, and it's the identity of Satan, the identity of Lucifer, the identity of all these different what I think are all different beings. Personally, I think that there is one Lucifer, one dragon, the dragon one, one of that. But it's interesting the way it all plays out. But I want to get your take on it. Everybody already knows my take on it. And in fact, I agree with David's assumption, or David's teaching that that Lucifer is actually a son of Satan, but I'm open to being wrong about it. But I want to get your take on it. So this is the question. Lucifer is a cherub.
Mm-hmm.
Shouldn't he be a bull-headed creature and not a serpent? And I think you talked a little bit about how you believe he's part seraph, part cherub. And obviously Lucifer, Satan, it depends on if they're talking about Lucifer or Satan, but obviously this was one of the most powerful, this is probably the most powerful angel that it was in existence. So if I want to get your take on that.
Well, I would say when we talk about Satan and is he one or two individuals, there's a good case as you look at Hel-El and Hale-El, and one is being the king of Babylon, and so is there two individuals there. But I'm more of the case that there's only one, and until I can resolve this, I'm open to the idea. But here's the thing: is in Isaiah 14, where you get Lucifer, and only in the King James Bible and the Vulgate, otherwise it's Daystar. It goes back to Hale-El, and El generally denotes a name of a god like Michael or Gabriel or Azaziel, right? So many of them have that El at the end of the name. So one wonders whether or not that's an actual name that was not translated properly. And it's said that Jerome did not know what Hel-El was, and so put Lucifer in. Now, whether he was a Gnostic or not, and he wanted to put the Masonic god of the Bible or Masonic god in the Bible, that's a whole different rabbit hole. But here's the thing that I can't really dismiss is that in Isaiah 14, we see Lucifer falling from heaven, right? As it's said in the King James Bible, or Hel-El, right? And then if we go to Luke 10:18, it's Jesus now talking, and he says, I beheld Satan as lightning fall from heaven. It says Satan, right? And that's Lucifer in Isaiah. And I don't believe Jesus is making a mistake there. And I always go, if I can, to what Jesus says about anything first. And so he seems to be saying that Satan, unless there's two that fell from heaven, and this individual that's being described, whether it's the king of Babylon or actually Satan, or the son of Satan or son of Lucifer, however you want to do it, but it sounds like Jesus is saying that this is the same individual. So until I can reconcile that, I stick with them as one of the same.
Yeah, it's interesting. This is one of these subjects that I think that I don't know how many times I've studied over it, and I'm just completely, no matter how many times I study it, I'm just still never can come to like a for sure conclusion on it. And it's crazy because I've tried. This is one of the studies that I've tried so hard to really just wrap my mind around, because it talks about him being a man in Isaiah. It talks about him also being a cherub. It talks about and so you see all these different attributes, attributations, attributes assigned to him. And it just
makes or is that also some of the prophecies and descriptions in the Bible have multiple applications, telling you a similar story, because nothing new is under the sun. And so we have Lucifer wanting to raise his throne above heaven, and also we have a king does, but also as does Antichrist, right? And so it can be multi-layered sometimes in that sort of aspect. And if you look at it, it's written there that it may be multi-layered, especially as you read through Ezekiel and Isaiah. So I think it is talking about more than just Satan. But that doesn't mean that Satan, to me, is a different individual than Hel-El.
It's interesting too. We have like the King of Tyre, where it talks about 3 limbs thing, and you have these tree gods that in mythology I'm sure you're aware of. It's just interesting, man, the way it all kind of plays out. It's an amazing subject to talk about. I know I'd love to get you and Gary on sometime, or you and David on sometime, to like just have a roundtable about it, to really just kind of bring out everything you guys know about it, because honestly, it's one of those subjects that's just picking at my mind for a long time now. And so maybe one of these days. But I'm going to go ahead and ask the next question real quick. This is the last question that I'm going to be asking, but this is over from YouTube. JD says, can you ask about how dragons are all over the Vatican? What do you think about that, Gary?
What do I think about that? I think they shouldn't be all over the over the Vatican, but I think this is just as dragons and various types of dragons, like gargoyles and other things, are all through the great Notre Dame cathedrals. So you've got two things going on here. Is that you had Gnostic moles that, and I'm not going to make this a long answer because it really could be, but like the Manichaeans, when they're being persecuted, they mold themselves into the collegia for protection from the persecution from the Vatican Church. And so they took over the knowledge of building, and in particular building the temples and stuff. And of course, they also were the inheritors of this ancient knowledge that goes way back. And so, and then they also become, the sponsors of the Templars and the sponsors of the great cathedrals, the Gothic architecture, that, the knowledge that comes back from Jerusalem with the Templars and the Masons, right? So all of this is sort of interconnected. So you got two things going on. So I think you have that is corrupting the older churches in their design. And I think you also have some complicity in the church, because you would expect the Pope to understand that dragons and such beasts like gargoyles have no place on a church, right? So there has to be some complicity, being complicit there as well. And so I think what it is just sort of, again, hiding in plain sight. This religion that's going to be having two horns like a lamb, but speaks like a dragon. I think they just hit us over the head over and over and over and over and over with it. Just as if you take Rome as an allegory for Babylon. If you were to take Strong's in Peter and in Revelation and take Babylon back, it's got, of course, the ancient physical meanings of what Babylon is in the ancient city in Mesopotamia, but it's also known as an allegory for Rome at the time of Jesus. And so all of this sort of goes over and over and over and over, that, it's in the Vatican for a reason. That's the religion of the dragon that's going to, that took over to a certain degree very early on in the Christian church and has been whittling away at its inner core ever since.
Yeah, it's no coincidence that stuff is there, that's for sure. And it's not a mistake. They have it there for an exact reason and purpose. Yep. No doubt.
And they don't explain it, and they don't take it down.
Exactly. So, Gary, one more time before we leave, let people know how they can reach you, what your website is, and how they can get your book.
Right. So you can get a hold of me through Genesis6conspiracy.com. That's Genesis 6 with the number 6. And that's my website, and you can look at a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters on the book, so you can get a good feel for the book. You can also email me through the website. You can also get a hold of me at Gary Wayne on Facebook, or 2 Genesis 6 conspiracy pages. You can also follow me and get a hold of me on Twitter at GaryWayne63, at GaryWayne63. And if you get a hold of me with a question, I will get back to you. And if you got a comment that it looks like you want me to get back to you on, I'll try and comment on it or tell you whether or not I know anything about it or not. And my book is available through Amazon.com, Amazon around the world, BarnesandNoble.com. It's also available in Kindle version through Amazon if you want a digital version. And if you want to buy it through your local bookstore, it's distributed by Bookmasters. They may not have it on the shelf, but they can order it through Bookmasters. And of course, they're one of the bigger distributors for books. And if you want a signed copy, you can order that through my website as well.
Very good. And I know this, I can say that Gary is very good about getting back to people. I notice on his comments that he always seems to get back to people when they ask questions and stuff. And that's not something a lot of people do, including myself, not because I don't want to, just because I've got a million things going on in my head. But Gary's very organized about it. Does a very good job. So make sure you guys follow him on Facebook. I don't know if he's reached his friend limit yet, but if not, definitely a good resource when you have questions concerning these types of things. go ahead and do that. So I just want to say thank you for everybody who is listening tonight. There is quite a few of you watching, whether you're on YouTube or on our website. And it's amazing to hear it. And hopefully, just to give you guys an update, our app hopefully will be out on Apple very soon. Like I said, for some reason, Amazon had some issues with what we're doing. So I'm talking to them. Hopefully I can make that happen with the Android. And so anyways, just pray for that. Pray that that works out. Apple should be out soon, hopefully within the next few days. So we're hoping for that. It'll have all our shows on podcast form. And so that you can watch, you listen while you're at work or whatever, you can listen to everything on there. So we're thankful for all you guys, and we are blessed to call you friends and family. And that's the way we think of you guys. And it's been just a great road for you guys for the last year, being able to talk to you guys and fellowship with you guys along the way. And if you haven't, make sure to subscribe. If you like what you're hearing tonight, hit the subscribe button on our channel. Sign up for our mailing list. If you look in the description of the book, there is a link to this show tonight where we have our private chat. Sign up for our mailing list. A lot of channels have been dropping off YouTube. We're going to continue to stick it out as long as we can, even though they've pretty much leveled out our advertisements and stuff on there, which we're fine with. We wanted to continue doing this anyway on YouTube so that a lot of people can hear it, and we're still allowed to do that. There's still a lot of people viewing, and so we're going to continue on here as long as possible. But there are many other venues to get a hold of us in case something were to happen and we were to drop off. So thank you guys. High five, everybody, and shalom. And we will see you guys tomorrow night with Stephen Pigeon, the translator of the Sefer. And so he will, if you have questions, make sure you guys come on tomorrow about that. It's going to be interesting. I don't know if you've had the Sefer yet, Gary, but it's pretty awesome. It's got all the not extra canonical, the apocryphal books in it and stuff like that as well. Very good stuff. So thank you guys very much and have a great night. Shalom.